working in very deeply technical roles and progressed into digital forensics and incident response, and predominantly focused on hacking and malware type investigations. So they're really getting into the guts and the details of how things are operating and being able to trace an adversary through your network using all sorts of artifacts or pulling in disparate pieces of information to give you a story, a timeline about what happened, to give you the narrative in the story. And my career has sort of moved between what I would call like internal work, which is to the left of the screen. So working in security operations centres, helping to be proactive in detecting and responding to different attacks. And then on the right side of the screen, working as a consultant, so helping lots of organisations across all sectors throughout the world, actually. Been very fortunate with that. I've travelled around a lot and supported companies globally with different sorts of data breaches, incidents, hacking, malware. And so I'm just giving you my perspective on how I think businesses in Papua New Guinea, based on my observations supporting businesses and organisations in Papua New Guinea, around what they can do to prevent attacks. These three things, I'll explain what they are. But really they're not pitched at IT, so I'm going to try not to talk to an IT audience here, which are the people that I generally work with, you know, your engineers around fixing problems, sort of getting to where it becomes too difficult and they need extra support. I'm going to really pitch this towards your COOs or your CROs or your CEOs, directors, and try and arm you with the questions to make IT accountable. I'm sure there's been a fair few people in the room who feel like IT have dictated terms to them. I'm going to try and give you the questions to help flip it. So number one, becoming a ghost on the internet. So obviously I'm not talking about this. I'm also not talking about this. We're getting a bit closer. So what we have is a house with no front door, lots of closed windows, but windows are open at the top. So we're getting a little bit closer. This is what I'm talking about when being a ghost. So from your organisation's perspective, when you're on the internet, there is no door, there is no entry point, there's no way to access your network. So I'm going to pick on here the VPN. So the VPN is used to allow people to remotely access your organisation. Now, VPN technology has had its fair share of problems. A lot of problems that have contributed to some of the major breaches, and a lot of ways that adversaries, once they get into your environment, the way that they persistently remain in your environment. I'm not talking about, when I say about shutting down a VPN, because that's really what I'm talking about here, shutting down the VPN, shutting down access into your network, not having a gateway inside. I'm not talking about disconnecting the connectivity between regional offices and the head office. Those VPNs are a bit different. Those VPNs exist to join a network from different geographical places. What I'm talking about here are the remote users in the bottom of the screen. So not allowing remote users to have access into your network. And I'll explain why in more detail, but I'm talking about shutting that down. So that is a bold thing to do. It is impactful, but based on my observations, it's a necessary precaution that a lot of organisations in Papua New Guinea specifically should be really considering. So by shutting down the VPN, I'm not talking about interrupting remote work entirely. So with newer technology like Microsoft 365 or Google for Workspace, people can still access things like OneDrive or email or Teams, SharePoint through their phones, so they can still remain mobile. You know, if somebody's at home or travelling, they can still access those critical resources that they need to do business. What I'm saying is shut down that pipe or that connection directly into your organisation. So yeah, that might impact the legacy application, but in my experience working in this region, it's those systems that are used to enable that remote access just aren't being supported the way that you would expect them to. They're not being patched appropriately, they're not being configured appropriately, and it's leading to breaches. So email is one that has really moved a lot, or changed a lot. Most organisations that I work with would involve us doing some sort of form of email review. So we'd have an allegation, there'd be some sort of matter that we need to do an investigation, and through that investigation we'll be collecting email, reviewing email. We used to have to go on premise to different data centres, go and sit in the data centre with a big jacket on because it's freezing, and then we'd have to collect a copy of the Exchange server, which is an on-premise server hosting all of your email in your data centre, and extract the mail files and do the analysis. Pretty much all organisations I deal with these days are using Microsoft 365, so it's become a thing of the past. If you're still running on-premise Exchange, my advice is get off that as fast as possible and to use Microsoft Online or use Google Workspace or an alternative. The other thing to note is that Exchange is actually becoming end of support, so if you do have it, you're at risk of problems occurring and not being able to patch them. I've seen a few scenarios where Exchange hasn't been patched and there's been lots of vulnerabilities and attackers are just compromising Exchange to get into your network. So that's why I'm advocating this. It also reduces complexity and cost in IT management. You don't need a specialist resource to drive Microsoft 365. It's quite simple and intuitive, and Microsoft are responsible in this instance. Google, I'm intermixing the two, but the cloud provider are responsible for making sure that everything's online and working as you expect it to. With the VPN shutdown, we'd be limiting remote clients from being able to connect into the VPN, into the network, into the remote offices, and people will still be able to access their email. So if you think about most organisations, that's going to work out pretty well. Not everyone's a bank or an airline who has a booking system, and so really you could ask yourself, like, why do we really need these services like VPNs or websites or any other external services? Why do we really need that facing the internet? Can we just trust an external service provider who's a specialist in that area to take care of it for us? So here's a list of some of the recent vulnerabilities that have existed in some of the security technology that sits on your perimeter. So the FortiGates, the Ivanti devices, the Sonic walls. These are all the big vendors and the critical vulnerabilities that have been introduced into their software over the past few years. And when I say critical, what this means is that if you have not applied a patch or secured or mitigated that vulnerability, then there are scanners on the internet that are constantly searching for these vulnerabilities. And so if they find it, they will exploit it and they'll get a foothold on your network. And then that's the beginning of an incident. If you shut down, like I said, the perimeter, the edge, and you disable all the external services, then there is nothing to attack. So even if you do not patch these devices, and I have seen that this has been a real challenge in this country, is patching those perimeter devices. If there is no service to exploit, then there's no issue. So you don't have to patch in that instance. So that's my strong recommendation, to actually go in and to disable those services. It's widely discussed within my community that the state of security for a lot of these security devices that are on the edge are a dumpster fire. The code is old and legacy. There's been little investment in updating it, and there continues to be a stream of remotely exploitable vulnerabilities. So if we shut down the perimeter, that means that everything that's like sort of soft and squishy and easy to exploit on the inside is not visible to the outside world. So you're just reducing a heap of risk to your organisation. So the number one thing you should be looking at is, well, what is externally facing? What can be scanned? What can be exploited to get into our internal network, which we know has risk? So from an adversary's perspective, if they're scanning and your organisation doesn't have any service available, they'll just move on to the next victim. So this chart just shows the services that are most commonly discovered in PNG. This is just using an internet scanner, a freely available one, that's constantly scanning the internet and collecting information about exposed services. And these are the top hits. And what you'll find is that most of the services that are discoverable are your administrator or your IT management systems or IT type services, ones that can enable your IT support to remotely connect into your environment. My advice is tell those service providers to come into the office to do the job. Don't allow them to remotely connect in, or accept that risk and or they will potentially get in an adversary. You can accept the risk and say, well, the benefit of them being able to come in and provide remote support outweighs the benefit of a cyber attack that could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in remediation work. So it's really that sort of decision that you're making. So if we become ghosts on the internet, we shut down all of our perimeter services, then we take ourselves off the map. So this is a map of PNG at the moment, just sort of highlighting the number of services that are sitting out there that are ready for the taking. So if you remove yourself from the internet, then you're off this map, and that's the goal. So if we remove ourselves from the map and we become ghosts, the next way that adversaries get in is by attacking the inside of your network. And there's kind of two primary ways that they do that. One is through email. So they'll send you like a malicious email, get you to click on something, and the other is the browser. So we need to secure the endpoint. Now when it comes, what are endpoints? So endpoints are your computers, your laptops, your servers. Those endpoints are the ones that, your corporate devices that people are using to access resources. The other sorts of devices that you have would be your network devices. And now the reason I've got this slide up here is because you've got two different types of adversaries that I've seen supporting PNG. One is to the left, and they're your more sophisticated adversaries. These are your nation states. These are the ones that once they break into your network, they're collecting intelligence. They're tasked with collecting intelligence, and they are not noisy. They remain in your environment. They collect information. You don't feel the impact. You don't feel the impact short term. You feel the impact long term. They're there to collect strategic intelligence, to help them with negotiation and decision making, to give them a competitive advantage. The ones that are on the right-hand side of the screen, they're your ransomware groups. They're the ones that come in, they punch you in the face, they're there. They're the ones that have short-term impact. Now, the ones on the left-hand side of the screen, your more advanced adversaries, they know that if you invest in some endpoint detection, some decent hygiene in your environment, that it's more difficult for them to get access to your environment to remain persistent. So they will hack things like your network devices, your printers, these sorts of systems that don't have endpoint controls. That's hard. Those adversaries target certain sorts of organisations. They're not the ones that I want to focus on. I want to focus on the ones that are more obvious, the ransomware groups. They're the ones that are short-term impactful, the ones that you'll really want to care about immediately. So they'll target your workstations and your servers. So there are some simple things we can do to harden those defences. So what we want to do is we want to tick all the boxes in our endpoint security products. So the ransomware groups, they are sector agnostic. You can see on the chart here that they target really any industry. They are opportunistic. If they find that vulnerability, say on the perimeter, they'll exploit it, they'll break into your network. If they then encounter endpoint protection that's stopping them from moving further, they'll generally just move on to the next organisation. They don't hang around. So by ticking all the boxes, you prevent these breaches from happening. So with uplifting your endpoint controls, you reduce the risk of these attackers from being able to exploit systems once they break into your network. So things like antivirus, anti-malware, endpoint detection and response tooling, keeping all your servers up to date and your workstations up to date, patching, These are all really important controls that will make it more difficult for an adversary to take over and encrypt all your systems. What happens if you don't do that is that you make it way too easy for the attacker to break into your network and to encrypt all of your data and hold you at ransom and extort you. So what we want to do is we want to make it more difficult so that the adversary just moves on to the next victim. Now, it's overwhelming in terms of the number of controls that exist in endpoint security products and technology these days. But what I would say is that you should look at what technology you have now and then go to IT and say, have you enabled all the security features that actually exist in this product? I've seen organisations that have never implemented patching ever. So they've installed Windows, and maybe they're using Windows 7 or the early versions of Windows 10, and they have never ever applied a patch. And so what that means is that an attacker just comes in and just slices through your network like Swiss cheese. It's very simple for them. Or they've deployed endpoint security technology, but they haven't enabled all the settings. So you can go and buy these tools and this technology, but unless you enable the functionality, they can't do anything. I've worked on cases, especially when I was at Symantec, where there were some big global worms running through networks, and the client was saying, well, you didn't do anything. You didn't actually spend all this money with you, and you didn't prevent this big worm from attacking our network and bringing down our systems. And once I looked at the configuration, I was like, well, you didn't enable these features, and we've got recommendations saying that you should enable these features. And so really it was on them that they didn't tick all the boxes. And so, to IT, you should be saying, have you enabled all the features? Are there features that don't exist that you have not ticked? And so when you're enabling those features, you have different modes of aggressiveness. Here's an example of the CrowdStrike security tool. And you can see that there's a policy there, and it talks about cautious, moderate, aggressive, and extra aggressive. Go with extra aggressive. Go with the most secure policy that doesn't break your business. That is my recommendation. So go into these tools, ask IT to check all those controls, tick all the boxes. If they don't know what they all mean, contact support, and they'll help you through it. It's in their best interest that you are getting the best value out of their products. So my advice is to contact support and ask them if they can run an audit or a check to make sure that you're getting the most out of the products. So once you've ticked all the boxes, none of these security technologies are just set and forget. You can't just deploy them, install them, tick all the boxes and then say it's done. You need to look at the alerts. So they'll generate alerts, and you need to ask IT to say to you, provide a report that shows all the alerts over, say, the past week, and then ask them, why did that alert trigger? And IT should be able to answer that question. So don't just deploy the technology and leave it. Look at the alerting. Make sure that people are receiving those alerts and are accountable to responding to them. The other technology that I'm seeing exploited almost in every single intrusion is Active Directory, which is the centralized controller of all the workstations and servers in your network. Just over the years, Microsoft have continued to add bells and whistles to Active Directory, and they've had to allow for backwards compatibility. So what that means is that old holes and vulnerabilities and things, it's very complicated. It's very difficult for people to secure it. And Microsoft have now created Entra, which is a cloud-managed version of Active Directory. My advice is to take advantage of those solutions and to think about when IT have systems that can remotely control and access your whole environment, they're exactly the tools that an adversary tries to take advantage of. So you need to ask the question of IT, if someone took over your account, what could they do? How do you prevent that from happening? And this is especially true with things like backups. So if IT's account gets hacked, could a threat actor delete all of your backups and wipe out your organization? You need to ask IT that question. And then they need to be able to say to you what controls they have in place to prevent that from happening. Because let's just say the worst case scenario does happen and everything gets encrypted. If you've lost all of your digitized information and you have no backup, you're kind of done. Change control. So I've noticed that change control is a bit of a foreign concept. What it is when somebody makes a change to your IT environment that has the potential to impact things like network availability, the availability of backups, the integrity of backups, it could introduce new security risks. So what you need is a process that says for every single change, whether it's our internal IT or it's our third-party provider, that they're following a process that addresses and asks the questions around risk. And there's a lot of information out there and tools, but really the simple process is document your change. We'll review the change. I want to understand what the risks are. And then if something goes wrong, what's the backup plan? This is really important. You can't just have IT coming in and making changes. And I'm talking about third parties here, coming in, changing your network, changing the environment, introducing new risks, or making changes that you don't understand and losing control. So documented change control, really important. So in an ideal world, and it's not really that hard, you know, we've shut down the perimeter. We then want to ask IT for a report. And the report should say, I want you to correlate every single person we pay, so everyone we have in payroll, with their identity in Entra or in Active Directory. And I want you to make sure that they have multi-factor authentication. I want you to make sure that their devices are all up to date and patched. I want you to make sure that we have endpoint detection, security controls on all of their devices. And I want you to let me know if there's been any security alerts. I want you to explain them to me. And you should be getting that report every week and having an understanding and being able to ask those questions to your IT team. So that's ticking all the boxes. The next part is doing your part in the cloud. So we've heard some of the talks today around leveraging cloud-based services, and I'm definitely an advocate for that. The way to identify all of your cloud services is to look at the bill. Look at who you're paying, the invoices, and you'll see recurring monthly payments. I've definitely seen some organisations that have procured cloud services. You know, different parts of the business have gone and procured them, and other parts don't know that they exist. And then people start loading information into them, and there's an issue around security, and you have a data breach, and you've got to respond to that. So look at your billing, look at who you're paying, understand who your cloud providers are. That's number one. Now, cloud providers don't do everything for you. There's what's called the shared responsibility model. This is Amazon's shared responsibility model. They're all pretty much the same. So a friend of mine, the way he describes the cloud is it's someone else's computer. You still have some responsibility. It's your data. You create accounts or identities that sit on those platforms, and then you do configuration. So that's your responsibility. Below the line, the vendor or the cloud provider, they'll do all the coding and the updates to the code. They'll make sure that there's power and backups and all of those things. And that's actually a lot. That's great. You just can't use cloud and forget that you have a responsibility. So the biggest responsibility I would say with the cloud is using strong multi-factor authentication. So there's words these days, they talk about identity is the new edge. So if you think that we've shut down the perimeter, we have no network anymore, how does an adversary get access to our data? Often it's through compromising things like email accounts. So they'll get into your email, they'll start to search for passwords, they'll search for payments, invoices, they'll look for ways to monetize that access. Phishing, that's how they get your password most of the time. So you'll receive an email with a link some sort of incentive to log on to a service. It's not really the real log on, and they'll steal your credentials. So we need to think about securing identity. Now, on the right-hand side of the screen, you may have seen this prompt before. So this is multi-factor authentication. So there's been some big changes with multi-factor authentication. The factors that are receiving an SMS or a phone call to verify something are no longer considered secure. You need to be using FIDO2 compliant pass keys, facial recognition. This is a technology that will secure you from phishing. So if you think about the way that phishing works, I want to explain why these SMS and phone numbers aren't good factors for authentication. The other one that's also not good is if you've ever received, you log on and then you receive a prompt or a push notification and you hit accept, that's also bad. Let me explain why. So if you're, and I've got an example of a job that I worked on. So there was a person who was on a golf course, and they received, they were trying to log on to a system urgently. So they're putting in their username, their password, and this is into a phishing site, so it's not the real website. And then they received the push notification. They provided their username, they provided their password. The attackers just grab the username and password. They take that and log on to the real Microsoft, and then that triggers a push notification to the person's phone. And then they hit accept. They're trying to log on. The person is trying to access the system. They are going to do what they need to do in order to get access. They've already fallen for the scam. So these controls, SMS, that's just another box to put your password in. Phone call, you're expecting to receive a call because you tried to log on. So they are not security controls against phishing. I just want to make that really clear. They do not help you with phishing. The control that helps you with phishing is called phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication. That's what you want, phishing-resistant multi-factor. So I've really sort of paid out those older forms of multi-factor. They're not completely useless. They kind of are, but they're not completely useless. There's an attack type, it's called brute force. And so that's where somebody just goes to a logon prompt and just types in lots of different passwords. Different usernames, different passwords. So let's just say that person's on the golf course and they didn't try to log on, but they receive a push notification. They'd be like, I didn't try to log on. That's what those controls help with. Or the threat actor steals a username and password. They get stopped by the multi-factor because they don't have the PIN code or the SMS or the phone call acknowledgement. So it helps with those brute force logon attacks. They've almost died. No, they exist. These attacks, I won't say they have died. They still exist, but they're nowhere near as successful as phishing attacks. I definitely, anything with a logon prompt on the internet receives this. They just get hammered constantly, guessing usernames and passwords. That's why having good passwords or complex passwords is really important. And I would say that password length is actually more complex than having lots of special characters but having a short password, because it's just the way it is. So that's where they help. So really not that helpful. What you're looking for are a FIDO2 compliant, phishing resistant factors. So that's where you could, if you try to log on to a phishing website and the domain name is not the one that it expects it to be, it actually just won't provide the authentication. It won't provide that second component. ASD, the Australian Signal Directorate, they have the Essential 8, which is a list of recommendations around security controls. They introduced phishing-resistant authentication into their standards. That came in, I think, last year, or early on last year. You would have seen in the slide, I used to work for Okta, and they're an identity provider. And so I saw a lot of attacks targeting organisations, and truly do understand like how significant FIDO2 compliant factors are to preventing phishing attacks. So if you've got no perimeter, and then the only way to contact your people is through email to target individuals, and you can't steal credentials because of phishing-resistant MFA, you've really limited the attack surface to your organisation. So all of your cloud services, my recommendation, FIDO2 compliant or phishing-resistant MFA, and that's going to reduce entire attack classes for you. So with all reporting and recommendations and IT and making all these changes, it's really important to like trust IT, but also just check, just verify. So if you're shutting down the perimeter, then what you want to do is run a test to see that all the ports have been closed. So you get an external penetration test done. If you're securing your endpoints, you want to make sure that all the patching is up to date. Get someone to come in and check that. Endpoint controls, contacting support for your antivirus product or anti-malware product and saying, did we get all the settings right? Asking them to check it for you. So here's the checklist. Here's the questions for IT. So we've got our 3 different components, becoming a ghost. So this is the only slide I would say is worth taking a photo of. So simple questions that you can ask. What services do we have that are internet facing? And what happens if we turn them off? What is the business impact of turning off the VPN? What is the business impact of turning off Outlook web access? Ticking all the boxes. What is our IT asset inventory? What do we have? What are we paying for? How up to date are they? What's the patch level? What security alerts have we seen? And asking them, why did they occur? What have we done about them? Could it happen again? Have we enabled all the security features? And that goes across all of your technology. And then, really good one is really thinking through, could a hacker damage our backups? How resilient are we to a sophisticated adversary coming into our network and going after the backups? I don't think I said this before, but that is the first thing that they do. So once they establish themselves in your network, they'll find out where the backups are, because what they want to do is get maximum payment, right? So with these threat actors, they'll steal all your data, they'll encrypt all your systems, they'll delete all your backups, and then they extort you. So you have the option, do we pay, do we not pay? Now, in my experience, I don't know if this is, maybe it's something to do with PNG being a smaller nation or not as globally recognised as a big payer of ransom. But if you go quiet and you don't communicate with them at all, like if you don't, what they do is they'll send you like an email address or a link to follow to start negotiation. If you don't start a negotiation, if you don't initiate the dialogue, then they don't know what your position is. So they sometimes just move on. They won't go beyond that. They'll think, oh, too small, not a good chance of payment. They generally don't pay in PNG, so we'll be right. We'll just move on to the next victim. So I would say it's in your interest to have a think about that. I'm not going to say pay or don't pay, but I've seen that in this country. So it's worth considering. So backups are critical. If you're unable to sort of control vulnerability management, patching, getting good security controls, just make sure your backups are really good. And then with cloud services, understanding what you have, number one, phishing-resistant MFA, and then again, looking at the security alerts. And there's a bunch of things that you can do to verify that all of those things have been enabled.
So today what I'm going to be covering is how AI is transforming business analytics. So what I mean by business analytics, it's your budgeting, your forecasting, it's your reporting, it's your analysis. So what we've heard today already, and I'm not going to dwell on this too much because we've heard a lot of it today, but the purpose of AI is to increase productivity within our labor force. And we've heard a lot of that with a lot of the speakers today. But how is IBM doing that from a business analytics point of view? What we're doing is creating faster, more accurate forecasts using AI. We're reducing the barriers of entry or the adoption of the technology. So we're giving a natural language experience within our systems so users can use it very quickly with minimal training. And then we're bringing in generative AI to drive actionable insights. In a few minutes, I'm going to give you a bit of a demonstration of all these capabilities. And then why IBM? So what we typically do at IBM, we take the best of breed of technologies and then deliver them to our customers. So we're using our market-leading budget and forecasting reporting solution called Planning Analytics. And then we're taking our capabilities from our Watson X division, that's our AI division within IBM, and helping that productivity through. So effectively, what Planning Analytics is a budget and forecasting reporting solution that allows for budget and forecasting and reporting across the enterprise. And effectively what we do is we bring up your data from your source systems, so your general ledger systems, your ER systems, your HR systems, so things like Pronto, Oracle, SAP, and so forth, and then bring it into Planning Analytics at a level that makes sense so that you can make business decisions and allow budget and forecasting